Good evening, everyone, and tonight we have another episode of I Have Such Sights to Show You. And for tonight, I thought I would discuss Hellraiser 3. Now, in the past, I've discussed the first two films. I've even discussed Bloodline and comparing that with the original screenplay, but I kind of skipped over 3, so now I'm going to come back and discuss Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. Now, this was released in 1992, actually 93, I think. And this was took a while for it because it was about 5 years in between Hellraiser 2 and Hellraiser 3. New World Pictures, who had made the first two films, was definitely ready to do a third installment in the series after the success and popularity of the first two. Unfortunately, New World Pictures went bankrupt and went out of business. Eventually, a smaller studio by the name of Transatlantic Studios got a hold of the movie rights and proceeded forward with Hellraiser 3. Clive Barker would come back to serve as an executive producer on the film. Also returning would be Peter Atkins, would write the screenplay. They had to find a new director. They were going to go possibly with Tony Randall, who had directed the second one, but opted for Anthony Hickox, who had directed previously Waxworks as well as Warlock 2, Armageddon, which happens to be my favorite of that series. So with Hellraiser 3, they took on a little bit of a different tone. Transatlantic wanted to appeal to a broader demographic. And wanted to make it a little bit more, I guess, almost more of a slasher film. In fact, out of all the Hellraiser films, this is the one that you could definitely look at as saying, yeah, this is definitely an early 90s slasher film. The story kind of starts off, what this movie does do good is it does acknowledge the events of the first two films and does feel connected to those first two films. If you remember at the end of Hellraiser 2, we see what's called the Pillar of Soul comes out of the mattress, and both the puzzle box along with Pinhead are trapped inside. That pillar has now become a statue at the beginning of Hellraiser 3, is purchased by this nightclub owner, sleazy nightclub owner at that, by the name of J.P. Monroe. He's a younger guy. He's almost like a over-the-top version of Frank, almost. It's almost if Frank had a bastard son living someplace, it would probably be J.P., only not as dark or as brooding, perhaps, as Frank, but he certainly plays Kevin Bernhardt, who plays him. It definitely does a great job, I think, anyway, of just hamming it up, playing basically your typical early 90s douchebag type of character. Anyhow, he purchased this statue at this antique store, brings it back to his nightclub, where he also has like an apartment on top of the nightclub, which is called the Boiler Room, and it's definitely very much a very 90s metal type of nightclub. It's the type of place I would have hung out probably back in the day when I was younger. But anyhow, later on, we're introduced to the character, our main protagonist in this story, Joey, who's a reporter for a local television station, played by Terry Farrell, who some of you, if you're Trekkies, would know her from. She was in the show Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And she's at a hospital, and all of a sudden, this young boy or young man's like hurried into the operating room, and he has a bunch of chains stuck to him. And as they are trying to operate him, trying to get these chains off, his whole body explodes. He, of course, had the puzzle box, must have opened it up. And so Joey wants to go ahead and investigate what is going on. And this leads her back to the boiler room. She ends up meeting a young woman by the name of Terry, played by Paula Marshall, who incidentally had worked with Anthony Hickox earlier, as she had also been in Warlock 2 as well. And she has the box, and she explains to Terry what happened, or to Joey what happened. And so this whole investigation goes on. She does a little bit of a deep dive. She finds these old artifacts, a video recording of Kirsty Cotton. Ashley Lawrence does come back to play. It's a small cameo, but in the video recording, of course, Kirsty is talking about the Cenobites in the box and all this, and this is what leads her to have clues as to what's going on. Now, meanwhile, back at his apartment, JP has brought a girl back there with him, and she inadvertently gets too close to the Pillar of Souls and gets swallowed up by Pinhead, who, of course, once again, coming back to play Pinhead is Doug Bradley. And this is the movie where we see Pinhead at his most front and center in this movie, whereas the first two movies are a little bit more in the background. And he pretty much convinces JP to bring him more, I guess you could say, sacrifices, so he can be released from the Pillar of Souls and come back to his full form. And if you're wondering how Pinhead is still alive, because he was killed off at the end of Hellraiser 2, as it explains later, basically when he was killed at that point, both his human self, which would be, of course, Captain Elliot Spencer, and Pinhead are separated. So now Pinhead has no rules that binds him anymore. And Joey, who has a lot of nightmares, getting back to her, nightmares of her father who was killed in Vietnam. In her nightmares, Elliot Spencer, also played by Doug Bradley, explains to her what's going on about this demon that's now getting ready to basically unleash hell on Earth. And he's the one, and he proceeds to give her his backstory about how he came about. He was a World War I veteran, disillusioned with life in general, and came about the puzzle box, seeking its pleasures and pain. And of course, he's transformed into the Hell Priest, Pinhead. And now he's basically telling her to somehow draw him into his world so he can take a hold of him again, once again. So eventually, Joey's friend Terry, she ends up going back with JP because she is like an ex-girlfriend, and he tries to lure her towards the statue, but instead she knocks out JP, and Pinhead convinces her to sacrifice JP so she can stand at his right side. So he's unleashed. He ends up eventually turning both JP and Terry into pseudo-Cenobites. And then we have a big slaughter because underneath, downstairs from this apartment is the boiler room with tons of people, bar staff and everything, band, and Pinhead pretty much slaughters all of them in a scene that's almost, you could say, almost somewhat reminiscent of the scene in Carrie. It's probably about the biggest, highest body count you're going to see, particularly in a Hellraiser film. Like someone once did a kill count on that, and it was well over 100 people that were probably slaughtered. And of course, he ends up transforming some of them into Cenobites. One of whom is the bartender, who's actually played by screenwriter Peter Atkins, who I had on last month. So if you want to check out that video, I'll put a link below in the description as well. So, of course, he's turned into barbed wire, I guess Barbie Cenobite there, who breathes fire out of his mouth. And this is where the movie goes a little bit off the rails, you could say. You have camera head Cenobite, you have, I don't know, CD Cenobite. For those who don't know, CDs are the things we used to listen to music off of. The DJ gets transformed. Joey's trying to stop all of this. In one hand, she's trying to get Pinhead back into the box, but also trying to save herself. And so these Pinhead and the other Cenobites are now unleashed onto New York City, which was actually filmed in North Carolina. You have this epic fun scene inside a church where Pinhead walks in and pretty much destroys the whole church and does a mock crucifixion, so to speak, which was kind of somewhat considered a little bit sacrilegious. They wanted to actually film that in a real church, but obviously no church was going to let them film that scene. But in the end, Joey was able to lure Pinhead back, and him and Elliot Spencer kind of merge back and defeats him, so he can be more grounded now. And then, that's pretty much the story of the movie. What I would say, my own views on Hellraiser 3, and I mentioned this earlier, I do like how it's very well connected to the first two films. They maintain some of the tone, the more dreary, dark tone of the first two films, the more mythological tones as well. But in that regards, I do like that. I like how they kind of give you a little bit of an explanation how Pinhead could still be alive after dying at the end of the first two, at the end of the second film by the hands of the Chenard Cenobite. The overall, I think the story is pretty strong. The performances, I think, are good all around. Given the movie, they're certainly not as good as the first two films, but I thought Terry Farrell did a good job playing a new final girl now in the series, and she did have some pretty tough shoes to fill. Doug Bradley's great in this, playing both Pinhead and Elliot Spencer, and he has some very memorable lines. I think my favorite line of his is this line as he's trying to tempt JP into helping him. He says, "You have a quality. Whatever it is, be proud of it." Something I'm paraphrasing. It's not the exact line, but I always kind of like that line. The movie, I think, is well paced. Like I said, there's some very good practical effects. There are some, I guess you say, some CGI thrown in there. For the most part, it's an enjoyable film. It's certainly nowhere near as good as the first two films. This movie also the very ending leads into the second act of Hellraiser Bloodline, because we see this building that's mimicking the Lament configuration that we, of course, see in the second segment of Hellraiser Bloodline. So overall, I think my only critiques is it does go someplace where maybe a Hellraiser movie shouldn't go, and it does get a little campy, a little silly at times, particular with the designs of the pseudo-Cenobites. But, I was able to kind of get over that and enjoy it for what it was. I think the best design was probably what's called the Dreamer Cenobite. And this is the Cenobite that's was Terry, and she gets turned into a Cenobite, played, once again by Paula Marshall. That's a really cool design. So overall, it's a very good entry in the series. It's a good sequel. It's not great. But it's a lot of fun. It's definitely, I could see where some people who are big slasher fans would really enjoy this film. So I would I could certainly recommend it. Like I said, it's certainly not as good or as well performed as the first two films were, but it'd be very difficult to replicate that anyway. So for what it is, Hellraiser 3, I think it's a lot of fun. Like I said, it's a little corny, but it tries to maintain the tone, and once again, it does expand a little bit on the universe once again, and we do get a little bit more of a backstory to Pinhead, aka Elliot Spencer, in this. Probably Doug Bradley probably gets the most scene time in this movie between playing those two characters. So if you're definitely into Pinhead, this is probably definitely the movie you want to check out. Overall, it's probably my fourth favorite of the series, behind the first two and the fourth film. But you know what? It's still good. It's one that I will watch at least once a year. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Hellraiser 3. I'd be curious to hear your comments on the movie. I know some people really don't like the film, probably because it does deviate in tone quite a bit from the first two, but there are plenty who also like it and have a lot of fun with it. So, until next time, I hope you enjoyed this this video, and make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And we will see you next time.